Hi, I'm Tom Bolden, Tenmile Distillery's whiskey aficionado and history buff. Let's talk to you a minute about the inspiration behind our latest release in the American Revolutionary War series, General George Washington. Well, what would it take to give up absolute power? I mean, most of us kind of struggle with giving up a parking spot, much less the authority over an entire nation. In December 1783, General Washington did just that. He walked into the Maryland State House, stood in front of the Continental Congress, and resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. When King George III heard this, he said, if he actually has done this and is returning to the farm, he will be the greatest man ever. The British king knew that military leaders during the 18th century that won battles would often become emperor or king or dictator. They didn't return to farming. General Washington's resignation showed the world that leaders could also be human.
Washington wasn't born a legend. Born on February 22, 1732 in Westmoreland County, Virginia, he came from the middle upper class of colonial society, well off but not aristocratic. Unlike many founders, Washington had limited formal education. He never attended college, never traveled to Europe as a young man, and never studied law systematically. This allowed him to create a fierce drive for self-improvement that lasted his entire life. At 16, he became a surveyor, a job that proved crucial to his development. Surveying meant weeks alone in the Virginia wilderness, learning to navigate, to lead small groups, to handle hardships and uncertainty. It gave him a practical understanding of America's vastness and made him money. By 22, when he inherited Mount Vernon, he was already one of Virginia's wealthiest young men. The French and Indian War completed his early education. At 22, he led his first military expedition. It was a disaster. He was defeated, captured, and forced to sign a humiliating surrender. But Washington learned from failure in ways that defined his character. He developed what would become his greatest strength, the ability to lose battles but win wars. When the Continental Congress needed someone to lead the colonial army in 1775, Washington was the strategic choice. He was a Southerner leading a New England cause which helped bind the colonies together. When offered the position of commander-in-chief, he refused a salary, asking only that Congress pay his expenses. This wasn't just noble, it was politically brilliant, signaling that he served the cause, not himself. What Washington inherited was barely an army. It was just a collection of poorly supplied, poorly trained militia units facing the British Empire, the most powerful military force in the world. The early years were catastrophic. He lost New York in 1776, and by December had fewer than 3,000 effective troops left. But Washington had developed what military historians call the Fabian strategy. He recognized that he didn't need to destroy the British Army, just keep his own army alive and prevent the British from achieving their objectives. His famous crossing of the Delaware on Christmas night, 1776, followed by the surprise attack on Trenton, wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a psychological masterstroke that saved the Revolution when it was collapsing. Valley Forge during the winter of 1777 and 78 tested his leadership even more harshly. It wasn't just about cold and hunger, even though soldiers suffered terribly. It was about holding together an army and a cause when both seemed hopeless. Washington shared his men's hardships while transforming his collection of militia into a professional fighting force. Perhaps his greatest leadership moment came not on a battlefield, but in a meeting room. In 1783, with the war over but Congress unable to pay the army, Washington's officers discussed marching on Philadelphia and installing him as military dictator. Washington called a meeting to address these plans. When he struggled to read his prepared speech, he pulled out reading glasses his officers had never seen him use and said, "Gentlemen, You will permit me to put on my spectacles, for I have not only grown gray, but almost blind in the service of my country." That simple human gesture broke the conspiracy. The officers wept, and the idea of a coup died in that room. Washington had saved the Republic before it was even formally established. After the war, Washington wanted to retire to Mount Vernon, but the new nation under the Articles of Confederation was failing. When the Electoral College convened in 1789, Washington received every single electoral vote. He is the only president in American history elected unanimously. Here's what made his presidency crucial. The Constitution created the office, but Washington defined what a president actually does. He established a cabinet system, backed Hamilton's financial program to demonstrate federal power, and personally led troops to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion, proving that federal law would be enforced. His foreign policy precedents proved equally important. When war broke out between Britain and France in 1793, Washington declared American neutrality, establishing that America wouldn't automatically take sides in European conflicts. Jay's treaty with Britain in 1794 was so controversial that Washington was burned in effigy, but he submitted it to the Senate because he believed it served the long-term national interest and established that presidents must sometimes make unpopular decisions. His farewell address in 1796 warned against two threats: permanent foreign alliances that would drag America into European wars, and excessive partisanship that would tear the country apart. Both warnings proved prophetic. But Washington's most important precedent was stepping down. By 1796, he was exhausted and under constant attack, but he could easily have won a third term. Instead, he voluntarily relinquished power, establishing the two-term tradition that lasted until Franklin Roosevelt. When Washington died on December 14, 1799, Napoleon ordered 10 days of mourning in France. The British fleet lowered its flags to half-mast. Washington had transcended national boundaries to become a symbol of Republican leadership. King George III was right. Washington became the greatest man in the world, not because of the power he wielded, but because of the power he willingly gave up. That example still resonates, reminding us that true leadership in a republic is not about accumulating power, but about using it wisely and knowing when to let it go.